Bullies tugged her blouse in class. Her judo made them apologize in tears. Kira Nakamura kept her head down as she walked through the crowded hallways of Roosevelt High School, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum. Her petite frame made her nearly invisible among the throng of students rushing to their next classes, which was exactly how she preferred it. At barely 5 feet tall, with straight black hair that fell like a curtain around her face, she had perfected the art of blending into the background during her 3 months at this new school. The move from San Francisco to this small town in Oregon had been difficult enough without drawing unwanted attention. Her father's job transfer had uprooted her from everything familiar, leaving her to navigate the complex social hierarchies of Roosevelt High alone. She clutched her textbooks tighter against her chest, the weight of them somehow comforting as she made her way to her third-period chemistry class. "Watch where you're going, Rice Girl," a voice sneered from behind her. Kira's shoulders tensed as she recognized the voice of Madison Pierce, the unofficial queen of Roosevelt High's social scene. Madison was everything Kira wasn't: tall, blonde, confident, and surrounded by a loyal circle of admirers who hung on her every word. Kira quickened her pace, hoping to reach the safety of the chemistry classroom before Madison and her crew could escalate their daily torment. But her hopes were dashed when she felt a sharp tug on her backpack that sent her stumbling forward. Her books scattered across the floor as laughter erupted behind her. "Oops, sorry about that," Madison said with false sweetness, her blue eyes glittering with malice. "You really should be more careful." As Kira knelt to gather her scattered belongings, she caught sight of Tyler Morgan standing nearby, his warm brown eyes filled with what looked like sympathy. Tyler was in her English class, and she'd noticed him stealing glances at her during their discussions of Shakespeare. He was different from the other students, quieter, more thoughtful, with an easy smile that made her heart skip whenever he looked her way. "Need help with those?" Tyler asked, starting to bend down to assist her. "Don't even think about it, Tyler," Madison warned, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Unless you want to end up like her." Tyler hesitated for a moment, conflict playing across his features, before straightening up and walking away. Kira felt a familiar sting of disappointment as she watched him disappear into the crowd. She couldn't blame him. Madison's social power was absolute, and crossing her meant social suicide. The chemistry classroom provided only temporary refuge. As Kira slipped into her usual seat in the back corner, she caught sight of Jake Morrison and his buddies occupying the middle rows. Jake was Madison's boyfriend and the star quarterback of the Roosevelt Ravens, with the kind of cocky swagger that came from being untouchable. His sandy hair was perfectly styled, and his Letterman jacket stretched across broad shoulders that had helped him dominate on the football field. "Looks like our little ninja made it to class," Jake whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. His friend Derek laughed, a harsh sound that made Kira's stomach churn. Derek was Jake's shadow, shorter but meaner, with beady eyes that seemed to find cruelty amusing. Mrs. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, either didn't hear the comment or chose to ignore it as she launched into her lecture about molecular bonds. Kira tried to focus on taking notes, but she could feel eyes on her from across the room. The sensation made her skin crawl, and she found herself unconsciously hunching her shoulders, trying to make herself even smaller. The harassment had started during her first week at Roosevelt High. It began with small things, whispered comments about her appearance, accidentally bumping into her in the hallways, making exaggerated bowing gestures when she passed. But as the weeks progressed, the incidents became more frequent and more humiliating. During lunch, Kira usually found an empty table in the far corner of the cafeteria, away from the popular crowd's domain. She'd watch from afar as Madison held court at the center table, surrounded by her loyal followers. Tyler sometimes sat with a group of theater kids at a nearby table, and Kira would steal glances at him while pretending to read her book. "Earth to freak show," Derek's voice cut through her thoughts as he appeared beside her table. Madison wants to talk to you." Kira's heart sank as she looked up to see Madison approaching, her expression cold and calculating. Jake flanked her right side while Derek moved to her left, creating a semicircle of intimidation around Kira's table. "I heard you were staring at my boyfriend during class," Madison said, her voice dripping with false concern. "That's not very appropriate, is it?" "I wasn't staring at anyone," Kira replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you calling me a liar?" Madison's tone turned dangerous. Without warning, she reached out and grabbed Kira's sandwich, taking a deliberate bite before dropping it onto the floor. "Oops, how clumsy of me." The cafeteria had grown quiet around them, other students stopping their conversations to watch the drama unfold. Kira felt heat rise in her cheeks as dozens of eyes focused on her humiliation. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the mortifying attention. "Just leave me alone," Kira said, her voice shaking slightly. "Or what?" Jake laughed, leaning closer. "What are you going to do about it, Bruce Lee?" The racist comment sent a fresh wave of shame through Kira, but she bit her tongue. She couldn't fight back, not because she was afraid, but because of the promise she'd made to her grandfather before he died. He'd been the one to teach her judo, starting when she was just 6 years old. Through years of training, he'd instilled in her not just the physical techniques, but the philosophical foundation of the martial art. "Judo is not for hurting others," he'd told her countless times. "It is for protecting yourself and those who cannot protect themselves. The strongest person is the one who can show restraint when they have the power to destroy." She'd promised him she would never use her skills unless absolutely necessary, and certainly not for revenge or ego. At 17, she was already a black belt with years of competitive experience, capable of throwing opponents twice her size with ease. But her grandfather's words echoed in her mind every time she felt the urge to retaliate. The bullying continued relentlessly through the following weeks. Madison seemed to take particular pleasure in orchestrating new forms of humiliation. During gym class, she'd accidentally spike volleyballs directly at Kira's head. In the hallways, she'd time her movements to bump into Kira just as she was drinking from the water fountain, soaking her shirt. The worst incident happened during English class while they were discussing Romeo and Juliet. Mrs. Henderson had asked students to pair up for a scene analysis, and Kira had been hoping to work with Tyler. But before she could approach him, Madison had already claimed him as her partner, shooting Kira a triumphant smile. "Looks like you're with me," Derek said, sliding into the seat beside her. "This should be fun." Throughout the class period, Derek made increasingly inappropriate comments about the romantic scenes in the play, making Kira deeply uncomfortable. When she tried to focus on the actual assignment, he'd lean closer, invading her personal space until she could smell his cheap cologne. "Maybe we should practice some of these scenes," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "I bet you'd be a natural at playing dead." The comment sent a chill down Kira's spine, but she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't let them see how much their words affected her. Instead, she focused on her breathing techniques, centering herself the way her grandfather had taught her. As October turned to November, the harassment escalated. Madison had apparently grown bored with simple verbal abuse and began targeting Kira's few possessions. Her locker was broken into repeatedly, with books and papers scattered or destroyed. Someone had even poured chocolate milk into her backpack, ruining her homework and forcing her to explain to teachers why her assignments were stained and illegible. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday morning in late November. Kira had been looking forward to seeing Tyler in English class, where they'd been assigned to work on a project about modern interpretations of classic literature. For the first time since arriving at Roosevelt High, she felt like she might actually connect with someone. She'd spent extra time that morning getting ready, choosing her favorite blouse, a simple white cotton shirt that her grandmother had given her, and braiding her hair in a more sophisticated style. As she walked into the classroom, she caught Tyler's eye and felt a flutter of hope when he smiled at her. "Hey, Kira," he said as she approached their shared table. "I was thinking we could focus on how West Side Story adapts Romeo and Juliet themes. What do you think?" For a moment, Kira forgot about Madison and her crew. She and Tyler fell into easy conversation about the musical, discovering they both loved the way it translated Shakespeare's themes into a modern urban setting. Tyler was intelligent and thoughtful, asking her opinion and actually listening to her responses. "You know, you have really interesting insights," Tyler said, leaning closer as they worked on their outline. "I never thought about how the dance scenes mirror the balcony scene's intimacy." Kira felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I love how music can express emotions that words can't capture." "Exactly," Tyler agreed, his eyes lighting up. "Maybe we could watch the movie together sometime, compare different interpretations." Before Kira could respond, she felt a sharp tug on her blouse. The fabric strained against the buttons as someone yanked it from behind, causing the top two buttons to pop open. Gasps and snickers erupted around the classroom as Kira scrambled to cover herself, her face burning with humiliation. "Oops, sorry about that," Madison said with mock innocence, having somehow positioned herself behind Kira's chair. "I was just trying to get your attention. Your shirt was all wrinkled." The room erupted in laughter as Kira fumbled with the broken buttons, tears of shame threatening to spill down her cheeks. She could see Tyler's shocked expression, his mouth hanging open as he stared at her exposed skin. The betrayal in his eyes hurt more than any physical blow could have. "That's enough," Mrs. Henderson called from the front of the room, but her intervention came too late. The damage was done. Every student in the class had witnessed Kira's humiliation, and she knew the story would spread through the school like wildfire. Kira grabbed her books and ran from the classroom, Madison's laughter following her into the hallway. She didn't stop running until she reached the girls' bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and finally let the tears come. The white blouse, her grandmother's gift, was ruined, buttons scattered across the classroom floor. As she sat in the bathroom stall, trying to compose herself, Kira heard the door open and footsteps approach. She held her breath, hoping whoever it was would leave quickly. "Kira?" Tyler's voice was soft, concerned. "Are you okay? I know you're in there." "You're not supposed to be in here," Kira managed to say, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I don't care about the rules right now," Tyler replied. "What Madison did was completely out of line. I'm sorry I just sat there like an idiot." Kira emerged from the stall, her eyes red and puffy. Tyler was standing by the sinks, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking genuinely distressed. "It's not your fault," Kira said quietly. "You can't stand up to her. She'll just make your life miserable too." "That's not an excuse," Tyler said firmly. "What she did to you was wrong, and I should have said something. You don't deserve this treatment." For a moment they stood in comfortable silence, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging between them. Then Tyler stepped closer, his expression serious. "I meant what I said about watching the movie together," he said. "I'd like to get to know you better, away from all this high school drama." Kira felt her heart skip, but before she could respond, the bathroom door burst open. Madison stood in the doorway, her face twisted with rage. "How touching," she sneered. "The freak and the theater geek finding love in the bathroom. How romantic." "Leave her alone, Madison," Tyler said, stepping protectively in front of Kira. "Haven't you done enough damage for one day?" Madison's laugh was cold and cruel. "Oh, Tyler, you have no idea what I'm capable of. You think you can play white knight for this little nobody? Let me show you what happens to people who cross me." That afternoon, Kira discovered that Madison had posted photos of her humiliation on social media. The image of her scrambling to cover herself had been captured by someone's phone and was now circulating through the school's networks. The comments were brutal, filled with racist slurs and cruel jokes about her appearance. But the worst part was seeing Tyler's name among Madison's followers who had liked and shared the post. When Kira confronted him about it the next day, he looked genuinely confused. "I never liked that post," he insisted. "Madison must have used my account somehow. You have to believe me." But the damage was done. Kira's trust had been shattered, and she found herself questioning everyone's motives. Was Tyler genuinely interested in her, or was this all part of some elaborate prank orchestrated by Madison? The harassment intensified after the Blouse incident. Madison had tasted blood, and she wasn't satisfied with just social humiliation anymore. She began targeting Kira physically, pushing her in the hallways, tripping her on stairs, and encouraging others to join in the abuse. Jake and Derek became more aggressive, cornering Kira in empty classrooms and making increasingly threatening comments. They seemed to enjoy seeing her flinch, taking pleasure in her obvious fear. What they didn't realize was that Kira wasn't afraid of them. She was afraid of what she might do if they pushed her too far. The final straw came during lunch on a Friday in early December. Kira had been sitting alone at her usual table, trying to eat her sandwich in peace, when Madison and her crew approached. But this time, they weren't alone. A crowd of students had gathered, phones ready to record whatever was about to happen. "Look, everyone," Madison announced loudly. "It's our favorite little immigrant. Tell me, Kira, are you here legally? Should we call immigration?" The crowd laughed, and Kira felt her blood begin to boil. She was a third-generation American, born and raised in California, but explaining that wouldn't matter to these people. They saw her face and made assumptions about her identity and her right to be here. "That's not funny," Tyler's voice cut through the crowd. He'd appeared at the edge of the circle, his face flushed with anger. "You're being racist, Madison." "Cut it out." Madison's smile turned predatory. "Oh, Tyler wants to play hero again. How sweet. Jake, why don't you show Tyler what happens to people who don't mind their own business?" Jake stepped forward, his larger frame towering over Tyler. "You heard her, drama boy. Walk away before you get hurt." Tyler stood his ground, his jaw set with determination. "I'm not going anywhere. What you're doing is wrong, and everyone here knows it." The confrontation escalated quickly. Jake shoved Tyler hard, sending him stumbling backward into a lunch table. Food scattered across the floor as Tyler struggled to regain his footing. The crowd cheered, their phones capturing every moment of the violence. "Stop it!" Kira found herself on her feet, moving toward the conflict. "Leave him alone." "Or what?" Madison laughed. "What are you going to do about it, little girl?" Jake grabbed Tyler by the shirt, pulling him close. "You should have minded your own business," he snarled, before driving his fist into Tyler's stomach. Tyler doubled over, gasping for air as the crowd erupted in cheers. Something snapped inside Kira as she watched Tyler crumple to the ground. All the weeks of harassment, all the humiliation, all the times she'd held back because of her promise to her grandfather, none of it mattered now. Tyler was hurt because he'd tried to defend her, and she couldn't stand by and watch anymore. "That's enough," Kira said, her voice carrying a new authority that made several students step back. She walked slowly toward Jake, who was standing over Tyler with a satisfied grin. "What did you say?" Jake turned to face her, his expression mocking. "Did the little ninja finally find her voice?" "I said that's enough," Kira repeated, her stance shifting subtly. To most observers, she still looked like the same quiet girl who'd been bullied for months, but something had changed in her posture, in the way she carried herself. "Let him go." Jake laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the cafeteria. "Make me." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Kira felt the familiar calm that came over her before competition. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of the principles of Judo, to use an opponent's force against them, to remain centered and balanced, to never strike in anger. I'm asking you nicely, Kira said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Please step away from him. You're pathetic, Jake sneered, reaching down to grab Tyler again. Both of you are pathetic losers who... He never finished the sentence. The moment his hand touched Tyler, Kira moved. Years of training took over as she stepped forward, her right foot sliding between Jake's legs while her hands found the perfect grip on his shirt. In one fluid motion, she executed a perfect Sioi nage, using Jake's own momentum and weight against him. Jake's eyes widened in shock as he found himself flying through the air, his body rotating in a perfect arc before crashing down onto the lunch table behind him. The impact sent trays and food flying as the table collapsed under his weight. The cafeteria fell silent, the only sound Jake's groans of pain and confusion. Derek rushed forward, his face twisted with rage. "You're going to pay for that, you little..." He swung wildly at Kira's head, but she was ready. She ducked under his punch and grabbed his extended arm, stepping behind him as she applied a textbook arm throw. Derek's feet left the ground as he was hurled over Kira's shoulder, landing hard on the linoleum floor with a sickening thud. Madison backed away, her face pale with shock. "How did you... What are you?" "I'm someone who's tired of being pushed around," Kira replied, helping Tyler to his feet. "And I'm someone who won't let you hurt people I care about." Jake struggled to his feet, his Letterman jacket torn and his hair disheveled. His face was red with embarrassment and rage as he realized the entire cafeteria had witnessed his humiliation. "You got lucky," he snarled. "That won't happen again." He charged at Kira like an angry bull, using his size and strength to try to overwhelm her. But Kira was ready. She sidestepped his charge and caught him with a perfectly timed hip throw, sending him crashing into a nearby trash can. The metallic clang echoed through the silent cafeteria as Jake lay sprawled among the garbage, his pride as bruised as his body. "Stay down," Kira warned, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made everyone in the cafeteria listen. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will defend myself if you keep attacking me." Derek had recovered enough to get back on his feet, but he was moving more cautiously now. He circled Kira like a predator, looking for an opening. "You think you're tough? Let's see how tough you are when I really try." He feinted left and then dove right, trying to tackle Kira around the waist, but she was already moving, her body flowing like water as she avoided his grasp. She caught his wrist as he passed, using his own momentum to send him tumbling across the floor in a perfectly executed sacrifice throw. The crowd was no longer cheering. They watched in stunned silence as the quiet girl they'd dismissed and tormented demonstrated skills they'd never imagined she possessed. Phones continued to record, but now they were capturing Madison's crew being systematically defeated by someone they'd considered weak and helpless. Madison tried to rally her followers, but they were backing away, unwilling to face the same fate as Jake and Derek. "This isn't over," she said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "You can't fight all of us." "I don't want to fight anyone," Kira replied, her breathing still calm and controlled, despite the physical exertion. "I just want to be left alone. But if you keep pushing me, if you keep hurting people I care about, I'll defend myself." Jake made one last desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. He grabbed a lunch tray and swung it at Kira's head, but she caught his wrist effortlessly. For a moment they stood locked in that position, Jake straining against her grip while she held him motionless. "You have two choices," Kira said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent cafeteria. "You can apologize to Tyler and leave us alone, or I can demonstrate why my grandfather spent 12 years teaching me judo." Jake's eyes widened as he realized he couldn't break free from her grip. The girl he'd tormented for months was stronger than he'd ever imagined, and she was barely exerting herself. "Let me go," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Apologize," Kira repeated, her grip tightening just enough to make her point. "I'm sorry," Jake mumbled, his eyes downcast. "Louder," Kira commanded, "so everyone can hear you." "I'm sorry," Jake shouted, his face red with humiliation. "I'm sorry I hit you, Tyler. I'm sorry I've been a jerk." Kira released his wrist, and Jake stumbled backward, massaging his hand. Derek was already helping himself up, his movements careful and pained. Madison stood frozen in place, her mouth hanging open as she processed what had just happened. "Now listen carefully," Kira said, addressing the entire cafeteria. "I didn't want this to happen. I've spent months trying to avoid conflict, trying to just get through each day without bothering anyone. But I won't be pushed around anymore, and I won't let you hurt people I care about." She turned to Madison, her dark eyes flashing with determination. "You've made my life miserable since the day I arrived at this school. You've humiliated me, destroyed my property, and spread lies about me. But the moment you involved Tyler, the moment you decided to hurt him because he showed me kindness, you crossed a line." Madison's composure finally cracked. "You think you've won something? You think this changes anything? You're still a nobody, a freak who doesn't belong here." "Maybe," Kira agreed, surprising everyone with her calm response. "But I'm a nobody who can throw you across this room without breaking a sweat. And I'm a freak who's tired of being afraid." The standoff continued for several more seconds before Madison finally broke eye contact. "This isn't over," she muttered, but the threat lacked conviction. She turned and walked away, Jake and Derek limping after her, leaving Kira standing alone in the center of the cafeteria. The silence stretched until Tyler stepped forward, his face split by a wide grin. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "My grandfather taught me judo," Kira replied, her voice soft again now that the confrontation was over. "He always said it was for protection, not aggression. I never wanted to use it like this." "You didn't have a choice," Tyler said firmly. "They've been tormenting you for months, and when they hurt me just for standing up for you, you had to act. You were protecting both of us." Around them, the cafeteria slowly returned to normal as students resumed their conversations. But Kira could feel the difference in their attitudes. The whispers were no longer cruel or mocking. They were filled with respect and amazement. She'd gone from invisible victim to someone who commanded attention and respect. Word of the cafeteria confrontation spread through Roosevelt High like wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone knew about the quiet new girl who'd single-handedly defeated the school's most notorious bullies. The story grew with each telling, but the core truth remained the same. Kira Nakamura was not someone to be underestimated. The next Monday, Kira noticed immediate changes in how people treated her. Students who had previously ignored her now nodded respectfully when she passed. Some even smiled and said hello. The hallways that had once felt like gauntlets of humiliation now felt manageable, even pleasant. Madison and her crew were notably absent from their usual haunts. Jake showed up to school with a black eye and a split lip, while Derek walked with a slight limp. They avoided Kira completely, taking alternate routes through the school to avoid crossing her path. Tyler had become a constant presence at her side, no longer afraid to be seen with her. Their friendship had deepened into something more meaningful, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. He'd asked her to the winter formal, and she'd said yes, imagining how different her life had become in just a few short months. "I still can't believe you never told me about the judo," Tyler said as they walked to English class together. "How long have you been training?" "Since I was 6, Kira replied, adjusting her backpack. "My grandfather was a black belt, and he taught me everything he knew. But he also taught me that strength without restraint is dangerous. That's why I never fought back before. I was afraid of hurting someone." "But you showed restraint even during the fight," Tyler observed. "You could have seriously injured Jake and Derek, but you held back." Kira nodded, remembering her grandfather's lessons. "Judo isn't about destroying your opponent. It's about neutralizing threats while maintaining your own moral center. I defended myself and protected you, but I didn't become a bully in the process." The final test of her newfound status came during lunch that Friday. Kira and Tyler were sitting together, discussing their plans for the weekend, when Madison appeared at their table. But instead of her usual aggressive posture, she looked nervous, almost vulnerable. "Can I talk to you?" Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alone?" Tyler started to object, but Kira placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's okay," she said. "I'll be right back." They walked to a quiet corner of the cafeteria, away from prying eyes and ears. Madison stood with her arms crossed, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "I owe you an apology," Madison said finally, the words seeming to cause her physical pain. "What I did to you was wrong. The way I treated you, the things I said, none of it was okay." Kira studied her former tormentor's face, looking for signs of deception. But Madison seemed genuinely remorseful, her usual arrogance replaced by genuine regret. "Why?" Kira asked simply. "Why did you make my life so miserable?" Madison was quiet for a long moment, struggling with her answer. "Because I was jealous," she admitted finally. "You were new and different, and you didn't seem to care about fitting in. I guess I resented that confidence, even though I see now it wasn't confidence at all. It was just you trying to survive." "So you decided to make me miserable." "I thought if I could make you feel small, it would make me feel bigger," Madison said, her voice thick with emotion. "But watching you stand up to Jake and Derek, seeing how you protected Tyler even though you could have just walked away, it made me realize what kind of person I'd become." Kira felt some of the anger she'd been carrying begin to dissipate. Madison's apology seemed genuine, and holding on to hatred would only poison her own peace of mind. "I accept your apology," Kira said finally. "But accepting it doesn't mean forgetting what happened. You made my life hell for months, and that's not something I can just ignore." "I know," Madison nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect us to be friends. I just wanted you to know that I realize I was wrong, and I'm sorry." As Madison walked away, Kira felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The confrontation in the cafeteria had been necessary, but this conversation felt like the real ending to her ordeal. She'd stood up for herself, protected someone she cared about, and somehow managed to maintain her moral compass throughout the entire experience. Walking back to Tyler, Kira reflected on how much her life had changed since that first day at Roosevelt High. She'd gone from being an invisible victim to someone who commanded respect, but more importantly, she'd learned that standing up for yourself didn't require abandoning your principles. Her grandfather would have been proud of how she'd handled the situation, with strength, restraint, and ultimately, compassion. The winter formal was everything Kira had hoped it would be. She and Tyler danced together under the gymnasium's decorated ceiling, surrounded by classmates who now saw her as someone worthy of respect rather than an easy target. Even Jake and Derek had nodded respectfully when they passed, a gesture that spoke volumes about how completely the school's social dynamics had shifted. As the evening wound down, Kira found herself standing outside the gymnasium with Tyler, looking up at the clear December sky. The stars seemed brighter somehow, as if the entire world had changed along with her circumstances. "Do you ever regret it?" Tyler asked, his arm around her shoulders. "The fight, I mean. You could have just kept your head down and eventually graduated without anyone knowing about your judo skills." Kira considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I regret that it had to happen at all, but I don't regret standing up for myself, and I definitely don't regret protecting you." "What would your grandfather think about all this?" Kira smiled, remembering the wise old man who'd shaped so much of her character. "He'd be proud that I found the courage to defend myself and others. But he'd also be proud that I showed restraint, that I didn't become the same kind of person who hurt me. The transformation was complete, but it had come at a cost." Kira had learned that sometimes standing up for yourself requires more courage than staying silent, and that real strength comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the wisdom to know when force is necessary and when mercy is more powerful. She'd found her voice, her confidence, and most importantly, her place in the world, not as a victim, but as someone who refused to let others define her worth. As she and Tyler walked hand in hand toward the parking lot, Kira felt a deep sense of peace. The girl who'd once kept her head down and hoped to be invisible had become someone who stood tall and faced the world with quiet confidence. She'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be broken, and that true victory comes not from defeating your enemies, but from refusing to become them.